Mother, man.
G'day guys, this is Mick coming from the penal colony down under, and you're listening to Myrtle Metal Mayhem.
Spreading faster than a case of the clap in a trailer court. Able to shatter eardrums within a 666-mile radius. A podcast more brutal than all the rest. It's Murder Metal Mayhem! Warning! Trigger alert! Trigger alert! Warning! Trigger alert! Warning! Trigger alert! Warning!
This is Pete Altieri and Tex from Murder Metal Mayhem, and we're doing an interview with Mick, a former Australian federal police officer. He's a listener and a member of the 666 Club. Always great to have his perspective when we're doing these true crime cases in Australia. So how's it going, Mick, and what's the weather like in your beautiful country?
Morning guys, obviously it's great to be here again and to this time talk all things convicts. The weather is perfect. It's a lovely balmy 30 degrees Celsius, so it's about 86 or so Fahrenheit, and no rain, nothing in sight, and I think I'm going to hit the beach a bit later.
Wow. Yeah, a little cold here for the beach, little still in the winter weather here. What about you, Tex?
Oh, it's in the 70s here, man. It's probably 75, 76, somewhere in there. Fahrenheit.
Nice. Fahrenheit, yeah. Very good.
Yeah,
very good. And we've got, just like with the podcast, Mick, we've got a lot of Australian viewers on the YouTube channel. So we hear from them quite a bit. I've got one that helps out with research for me, which is really awesome. So.
Okay, well.
So, yeah, down under, loving some Murder Metal Mayhem. Now in a multi way approach. We got the videos, we got all sorts of ways to reach people. So this is super cool. So Tex, why don't you go ahead and start it off?
All right. Well, hey, Mick, man, great hearing your voice, mate. Last time we talked about Port Arthur here on the podcast, it was about Mark Bryant killing 35 and wounding 23 in 1996. This time we're talking about the famous penal colony that was located there. Have you ever been there, and what's it like?
To start with, mate, yeah, it's good to see you again. No, I haven't been to Port Arthur. I actually haven't been to Tasmania at all. Tasmania obviously is the southernmost state of Australia, and it's an incredibly long way from where I live. So it'd probably be like, someone, like Pete, going to Florida. It's a hugely long place, to go. So no, I haven't been there. Obviously something that, I've wanted to do for some time, but, I just haven't got around to it, to be honest. I think from a perspective, post 96, Port Arthur's recovered well. It's a World Heritage listed site, so a lot of money obviously has been put into getting it back up to speed, and the Tasmanian government have invested a lot, not just financially but promotionally wise into changing the perspective and making sure that it is a nice place to come and visit. Obviously, post what had occurred with Martin. I've got friends and family actually who live down there, and they've been there, and it's a major tourist attraction, but that's, I suppose, if you like running around looking at rundown old buildings.
So I know that I've heard stories about this, Mick, and I know that, maybe some of our listeners aren't aware, but how was Australia founded? I mean, in a thumbnail sketch, how did Australia become Australia?
I guess you're talking European settlement to start with.
Right.
I'll start at the end with a statement, and then I'll come back to it. We probably have to either thank or blame America for this. Because just after your War of Independence, that's what prompted the English or the British Empire to basically say, we've got nowhere else to send our convicts, where else could we put them? So because you became independent, they've now had to find somewhere else. So, but from I suppose a European perspective, a lot of people don't know that Australia was very much on the sites of the Dutch first, probably 150, 200 years before the English even were anywhere in the vicinity. So the Dutch had the Dutch East Indies, which is Indonesia, and then obviously that area into Southeast Asia. So dating back to the early 1600s, the Dutch were circumnavigating Australia. So there's still to this day a lot of islands or a lot of places that are named after either Dutch settlers, Dutch explorers, or have Dutch terms. Like we have a famous place off the west coast of Australia called Rocknest Island. It's a very big tourist attraction, and effectively it means rat's nest, in Dutch, because we've got these small little animals that look like rats. So it's still very much Dutch orientated. But as far as the English goes, as I said, in about 1770, James Cook, was doing a bit of a travel around the place. And he mapped the east coast of Australia. The west coast and south had already been done by the Dutch, but he did the east coast. And then obviously at that point, claimed a place called Botany Bay, which is where Sydney is located, for king and country. And then in 1788 is when the first fleet came out. So the first shipment of convicts plus some free settlers, came out in 1788. And that's just after, as I said, your War of Independence. So they needed to find somewhere to go, send the convicts to. They've lost obviously a whole stack of land and resources, so they needed to now find something separate. From a Tasmanian perspective, it was about the mid 1600s that there was a Dutch explorer called Abel Tasman, which obviously came on to become Tasmania. So he founded it. He located it and called it what was called Van Diemen's Land, which I think, Mick, you asked Pete, you asked a question about a little bit later.
Right.
So that's pretty much, around that area. So the Dutch East Indies was very strong, in the northern part of Australia, and it was around, the 1770s through to 1780s that the English started to make a bit of a stance.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's all your fault.
We'll take it.
Yeah, so will we.
So, Mick, what was it about the penal colony at Port Arthur that was different than other places like it, around the world and maybe in Australia?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, because Port Arthur wasn't the first penal colony in Tasmania. The first started around about 1803. So we have another famous penal colony not far off New South Wales, off Sydney, called Norfolk Island. And Norfolk was a famous penal island, and that's where the worst of the worst was sent. It also became a leper colony.
Oh, wow.
And in around the early 1800s, 1803 or thereabouts, they shipped a whole stack. They closed down Norfolk and created what was called New Norfolk in Tasmania. So there was a lot of prisoners, a lot of free settlers, a lot of prison guards, had made their way from Norfolk into New Norfolk. So that became sort of like the first settlement. We then had what some people would argue, especially historians, something worse than Port Arthur on the west coast. There's a place called Macquarie Harbour and an island called Sarah Island, and that was known as Hell's Gate, and it was terrible, effectively.
Sounds like
that was around 1822. But Port Arthur itself started as a timber industry, timber colony. So looking at obviously shipbuilding and those types of things became quite a lucrative process and business in the area. But as a prison, it started around about 1833. And it was a new type of prison. And, you're probably better, to cast some suppose, expert opinion in relation to how prisons are built, and what they look like, Tex. But the change of focus was way more so from corporal punishment and, whipping people and giving them lashes, to more of a punishment reward-based process. So you behave yourself, you get more rations.
Right.
You do things less, you get less rations.
Right.
And part of what it looked like was with Port Arthur, it was specifically established. The prison was built by the convicts, the town was built by the convicts, the shipping industry was run and built by convicts. So it was very much that slave labour, which in some instances is probably worse than a normal prison.
Right.
But it's that sort of, I suppose, process looked at it, the way that it was established, what it looked like, as a physical building, changed, as well. So it's a little bit different, but it was certainly not, as I say, the first or arguably some of the worst that actually took place in Tasmania.
Interesting. Now, you had mentioned that Van Diemen's Land, and when I first heard that, I didn't hear the Van parts. I'm like, Demon's Land? That's such a cool name. And I thought maybe, that because we're so popular in Australia, Mick, especially with the women, that maybe you could influence them to turn it back into just Demon's Land, on behalf of Murder, Metal, Mayhem. I don't know if that would be possible or not.
Oh, it'd certainly be a nice thought, wouldn't it?
But yeah, the Hell's Gate too. You guys got some good names down there, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously that was the first name. So there was a governor of the Dutch East Indies in Indonesia at the time called Anthony Van Diemen. And as most explorers do, when they find a new continent, they'll name it after something where they come from, or some notable sponsor. I'm sure it didn't do Abel Tasman any negative outcome for his career when he called an island after his boss.
Right.
Now, Mick, I know Port Arthur, like you were saying, I mean, they were considered a model prison and used the idea of what they call the panopticon. There aren't too many prisons designed this way today. In fact, I don't think there are any that are designed this way today. But can you explain the panopticon design? Because it sounds like, probably to the layman, it sounds like something from a Transformers Transformers movie.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. So obviously it's a thought or a process that's a design of a prison where, there was a central cylindrical basis, or building, and all of the respective wings or arms, spread out from this centralized hub. And the thought was that every prisoner could be watched by one prison guard at all times. So the shape of it looks like either like a flower or, a central circle with, branches coming off. So it looks like a bit like a snowflake type design. And it was this thought that got adapted to hospitals and other, government institutions, where they were thinking from a centralized point, one person could watch every single individual, or have an ability to see every single cell, and not have, or sections cordoned off and have their own guards watching it.
Yeah, and Mick, with your psychology background, what kind of mind game does that play on the individual being watched 24/7 like that?
Oh, look, it certainly makes people paranoid. But it would obviously also put a bit of a sense that, well, the idea was that, prisoners or inmates weren't going to, get up to mischief.
Right.
Because at some point, at one point in time, there's always someone who's going to be watching them, or the perception that someone's always going to be watching them.
Right.
So whether or not it worked as a model, at the time they obviously wanted something separate to, what they were doing, which I would presume is just a whole lot of inmates clumped into, single cells or larger areas. whereas this is more of an individualised basis where, people have a tendency to be watched individually, so you're less likely, I suppose, to play up.
Yeah, and Tex, I mean, you're a corrections officer, and nowadays we do this with cameras, right? I mean, it's the same principle, I would think,
It's the same principle, but it has a different effect, basically. The camera systems in our prisons are used to reduce rape, prison rape and violence and things of that nature.
Right. So, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
So, Mick, what were their incentives for these inmates? I mean, there was some light at the end of the tunnel for them, wasn't there?
Yeah, mate, there was. Yeah, so depending on how long your sentence was, then post doing your time, a lot of convicts had an ability to, purchase or acquire land. So they effectively became free settlers, after they've, done the stint that they were required to.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of areas, especially like Queensland, we had everything on the eastern border of Australia was known as New South Wales. So the entire thing, there was no separation of states at that point in time. And a lot of the areas from Port, Moreton Bay, which is Brisbane in Queensland. So there was another penal colony set up there, but a lot of that was to do with free settlers. So people coming from New South Wales, they've done what they've had to do, and then they've basically, settled the land. They've been able to purchase sheep. So a lot of our initial agriculture, and primary industries in Australia was started by ex-convict families.
Interesting.
And there was a thought, we had a governor at that point called Lachlan Macquarie, and that's what Macquarie Island in Tasmania was named after. And he was a bit of a revolutionist, I suppose. He came out here, he was a military man, obviously, but he came out with the thought that once people have served their term, and they've paid their penance, then they should have the same rights as any other, British citizen, whether they came out as a free settler or not.
Right.
So a lot of that growth really was implemented and started by Lachlan Macquarie. It's very much for once you've done your term, get out there, and become a respectable member of the society.
Right.
And, we'll provide you with the ability to purchase land and, jobs and everything else as well.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Now, there were some brutal policies over the years at Port Arthur, like, them not being able to talk and in total silence, and what, like today, we call solitary confinement. Today in the corrections field, we know that's the last thing we need to do, is let somebody back into the world angry and not used to human interaction and just with a lot of violent tendencies. In your opinion, what is it that's changed around the world in treating inmates humanely and trying to rehabilitate them?
Well, mate, you're probably better suited to answer that question than I am. But I suppose not just obviously in Port Arthur. We still got an example. Black Dolphin, which is the episode that Pete you've done in the past, where they still have this, ultimate silence. And some of the South American countries, are also the same. Complete silence. So probably, as you mentioned, it's people who have served their term. They're coming out. Potentially there's, the increase of human rights and human rights legislation that's come into place. I think that, there would have been a lot of, prison reviews and reforms that have come out to try to, address recidivism, and just to look at a more humane way of dealing with people. Because at some point, I would presume the expectation is that they serve their term and then they get released back into the community. And you want worthwhile, contributing members of society to come back, not people who are angry and disgruntled and, have a chip on their shoulder and some sort of axe to bear because they were treated appallingly by the institution.
Yeah, I know, Tex, you bring that up all the time, because you're right in the mix. I mean, that's the last thing you need is it's already a volatile, could be a volatile situation there behind bars. You don't need more of that,
Yeah, I think we finally come to realize that, warehousing them and everything like Mick was just talking about, it doesn't work. You have to rehabilitate. You have to give them some type of incentive to go back out and be productive.
Right.
And, I do think we finally come to that realization.
Yeah. I mean, if you send them back with no skill, they're just going to go back to what they were doing that got them there in the first place. It's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Vicious. Now, Mick, email exchange between you and I here just recently, you pointed out a U.S. case. I know normally we just talk about Australia, but you had voiced your opinion about the Delphi, Indiana murders that happened in 2017. I know I've done videos here on the YouTube channel about it, and you had expressed, how the police work seems just really shoddy. I mean, I'm only a couple of hours from Delphi. It's kind of creepy that it's that close, but what did you want to say about that? I mean, obviously, as a former Australian police officer, you obviously know how investigations are supposed to be done.
Oh, look, yeah, it was more of an observation to start with. And I think that it's something that we've touched on previously with other episodes where I've been on, where we've been talking about, police methodology and how they operate and what, the lay person would look at and then go, Jesus Christ, even I can see that there's something wrong here.
Right.
Yeah. We have a term, blind Freddy could basically see what's going on.
Right.
So it appears, especially from the Delphi, it appears that the police are trying to tailor their evidence to suit a narrative of who the suspect is, as opposed to, allowing the evidence to identify who the potential offender is.
Right.
So they've got this thought that this person, is good for it. They're the one who we're going to, rest everything on, and we'll try to manipulate or, obtain evidence to suit what it is we're trying to prove, as opposed to, investigations are supposed to be an objective search for the truth. Right. So obtain information and see what comes out of it, not to fit some narrative.
Yeah, and in that case, you've got the crime scene where the bodies were found was sealed up. They did their investigation over a couple of days. Then they released it, and then they established it as a crime scene, and that's when they found the unspent round out of that weapon, and they're claiming that it was from him.
Yeah, what a surprise, So
right,
it wouldn't.
Gee.
Who would have thought?
Yeah,
it wouldn't be the first time, that things like that, have occurred.
Right.
Now, obviously, having not been there, I can't speak to, what exactly took place.
Right.
But I'm not someone who believes in coincidences. And
Right.
To have a crime scene established for a number of days, and I would presume, or I would like to think, that they've done, a thorough and meticulous search of it, including metal detectors, possibly including, sniffer dogs, a whole raft of things, to then collect everything that they've collected, reopen it. God knows who's walked now through the crime scene.
Right.
And then all of a sudden go, yep, I think we're going to reestablish this.
Right.
Potentially on no additional grounds. Why did they remake it? There are times where you've got a crime scene, it's closed down, and then something occurs, and yes, legitimately you have to go back and reestablish the crime scene.
Right.
Because there's information or evidence that's come to light during the first search that you didn't know.
Right.
But to have people, just have a free-for-all walking through it, if that's
Right.
what took place. And then, oh, look at that, the next day we found this unspent cartridge.
Right. And I know the science on that is a little shaky with identifying an unspent cartridge as compared to a fired round. Is different.
Oh, of course, and, with it being unspent, does that mean that it was just dropped? Does it mean that it was ejected? Does it mean that there was a misfire? You know, and both ex-military, was it a misfire? So they had to rack and, discharge the misfired, bullet.
Yeah.
What's the specifics around this unspent cartridge?
Right.
But lying in, allegedly, clear open woods that they've been through previously before, for days on end previously,
it's questionable.
It's the biggest belief that that's what occurred.
Yeah, and then you got Idaho 4, they tear the house down. That a lot of people are up in arms about that. I mean, what are you thinking? You haven't even had the trial yet,
I have worked on murder cases. I've worked on a whole raft of things, and you don't rip the house down.
Right.
Yeah.
Primarily because you don't own it. You've obviously got to get authorization from the owners.
Well, the owner gave it to the university, and then the university tore it down, which is just really, I'm sure they didn't want it there because they didn't want their parents on university tours to go, oh, look, that's the house where 4 people were butchered back in 22. That's why they don't want it there. That's why they don't want it.
I agree. That's probably more to the truth.
Right.
So there's probably a certain amount of truth to that. There's possibly a certain amount of truth that if the house is demolished, then there's no ability to go in and do any additional, forensic work or crime scene work.
Right.
I can tell you, from an Australian perspective, until such time as that matter was finalised and someone was sentenced, the property wouldn't be returned to anyone. It would just remain, nominally in the possession of police.
Right.
So things operate, or they might operate a bit differently, in Australia, that if there's any death or there's a murder, there's a criminal side of things. So a Supreme Court justice or something will, rule upon a Supreme Court hearing. But because there's a death, our coroner also gets involved. And nothing can be disposed of, nothing can be returned, nothing can be, gotten rid of, unless the coroner explicitly says you can now return the house to the owner, you can return the clothes to whoever they were.
Interesting.
So nothing is being destroyed, nothing's being gotten rid of, and the house would remain taped, with police tape. It might not have a crime scene guard on it, but that would certainly remain as a part of a criminal case until such time as the whole thing was finalised. Right. So to have it ripped down, it questions whether they're doing something untoward to try to, look at the loss, concealment or destruction of evidence, or whether it's more to do with, well, this is now a bit of an eyesore. We're trying to attract people to, the campus. We want parents to come and send their kids here. We don't want the spooky murder house sitting on the corner.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Tex, I answered or started in on that Idaho question, but there's that second part of it.
It's all good, man.
You can address.
Yeah. Hey, Mick, with all the other investigatory things, do you think maybe that small town department is just a little bit overwhelmed? Because like in the States, most agencies will try to impose their own jurisdiction and won't call in assets from like the state or the federal level to come help and investigate, catalog the crime scene and stuff like that. I think it's maybe something of that. They're overwhelmed or something else.
Well, I think once upon a time, that possibly could or should have been the case. But, in this day and age, not anymore. With the ability to reach out to other departments and obtain resources, there shouldn't be any reason that even small jurisdictions, don't get it right. Well, at least most of the time they don't get it right. So once upon a time it was like, yes, we don't have the training, we don't have the understanding, we don't have the facilities, because we don't deal with these things on the day-to-day basis. We deal with theft or, a burglary or, something like that, an assault. But
Right. Yeah.
my opinion is those days are gone. In this day and age, no police jurisdiction, even if they don't have experienced investigators, they have an ability to reach out to relative resources. Now, for me, I think in this particular case, it comes down to a couple of things. One is, how the police departments are structured. So for example, in Australia, you have a state police force and that is it. You don't have state police forces and county police forces and district police forces and city and town and sheriffs and everything else as well. So it's one organisation, irrespective of what town you live in, you're still part of the same beast.
Interesting.
So it reduces that opportunity of, oh, well, they're stepping on our turf, or, the feds are coming in, or, someone else wants to come in and, and take over. So I think part of it is that. I think part of it's ego, especially if it's a sheriff or a local, law enforcement entity who a lot of the time, correct me if I'm wrong, are voted in. There's political influence. You get voted to become the sheriff or some of these, the head of these police departments.
Right.
So
exactly.
As a politician, they want to be seen to, be doing the right thing and, locking up crooks and making the community safe on this, because they want to get re-elected. There's this desire to, maintain their position. And if I was, the captain or whoever it was of the local, sheriff's department, it would be in my best interest to make it look like me and all of my team, solve this fantastic, homicide.
Right.
As opposed to reaching out to people who actually might be able to provide some assistance.
Right. And that's what happened in Delphi, is that guy was arrested very close to the sheriff's election. So that's very suspicious. After so many 6 years, they arrest that guy, and it was right before the election,
No such thing as a coincidence.
A lot of coincidences in that case. Yep. Now
it's like,
you had told me, Mick, that you're doing a different job now. Is there anything that you want to that you can explain of what you're up to these days?
Recently changed roles. It's still, obviously I can't disclose too much. It's still within, investigations, but I've moved from, I suppose, the area where I was now to like the state education department. So I now look at running investigations regarding serious misconduct or child abuse cases, within educational facilities, across the state.
Interesting.
So it's still investigative. It's more, I suppose, now looking at, what takes place in educational institutions, as opposed to, some of the stuff that I was doing previously.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a big job, mate. There's a lot of things that happen in educational facilities.
I'm sure.
Now, I thought you were going to say that you were getting into entertainment promotions, because Pete told me that you were asking about bringing us down to do some wrestling matches in Australia.
Oh boy.
I'm sure there might be some fighting fellas down there.
Mate, yeah, especially coming from our convict past, mate. I think Australia has this. Australians, the worldwide, have this perception as being hard as nails. So, but there's certainly a few guys I think that might be interested.
All right.
There's one guy, who I've been speaking to, and I'll run it past Pete and the promoter. He likens himself as a cross between Steve Irwin, so the crocodile hunter, the Tasmanian devil.
Oh, sure.
And Van Diemen himself.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
damn.
So,
wow. That could be interesting. Tex.
So he's been talking. He's been talking it up. So
okay.
Let's just see if he can, bring the goods.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be great. We definitely would love to come down there. But what did you think of our brawl on the bayou there? The end of the year last year, we ended it with that crazy match. What'd you think about that?
Oh, man, I thought it was good. It was funny. I thought it was a blast. I like the over the topness of it. How
Right.
at
The
times it just
pierogi
goes
falling.
just absolutely over the top.
Yeah.
I know some of the guys I know down here have been talking smack though about it.
Oh yeah.
And part of it's in relation to people's names, like that Punky guy.
Oh yeah.
In Australia, we thought Punky was some little girl character off a television show.
Oh wow. Yeah, Punky.
So
Punky
we're going, oh, okay.
Okay.
But from our perspective, I think the closest to Australian would be old Creole.
Yeah.
I think there would be a fantastic link between alligators and crocodiles.
That's true. Joe Ball too with his alligator.
Yeah, absolutely. So although alligators are a bit of a pussy version of a crocodile, but I think that link is certainly there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was that was over the top, and we recorded that with the crowd noise on purpose because I wanted us to be yelling over it, because I don't think we would have simulated it the same had we not put the crowd noise in right when we recorded it. And when I heard it back, I'm like, that was perfect because it sounds real. I mean, it really turned out better than I would have expected. So yeah, anxious to do another one of those. That's for sure.
Yeah, look, there's certainly some. I think there's some, from our perspective, there's certainly some smack that can be spoken about. Each of the fighters.
Oh,
yeah, that'll be fun.
Now, hey, Mick, is there anything else you wanted to talk about Port Arthur or penal colony or anything?
No, just I think that we come from a similar background, obviously, because the British had settled what is obviously America, and a lot of that was penal orientated as well to start with. So there's that similarity, but it's not just us, obviously. It's everywhere that the English or any other colonial sort of power went. Obviously, we have to tongue in cheek thank America for uprising against the English. That led us to be where we are today. Who would have known?
Right.
And the only other thing, is we mentioned it earlier, before we started, but how's that big war going, mate, in Texas with those, with the people coming across the border?
Right. Yeah.
It's going swimmingly. We've been working on it since 2016, but we'll get there one decade.
we over here, it's not uncommon to be shown in the news. It's something that we see on a semi-regular basis. About what's occurring over there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
but like anything in the news, you don't ruin a good story with the facts.
Right. Of
course.
That's right.
Yeah.
So who knows exactly what's occurring?
Yeah. If it bleeds, it leads. That's how it works.
Absolutely, mate.
But Mick, always a pleasure to have you on, buddy. Just a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on to talk with Tex and I. And we'll definitely get you on some more Murder Metal Mayhem YouTube stuff. We're talking about the true crime deep cuts and getting you involved in that too. So always welcome here, and love having you on, man.
Thanks. And obviously, as always, I appreciate the opportunity. Especially to provide, an Australian interpretation of things. Might not always be correct, but at least we give it a crack.
No, appreciate it, man. All right. Well,
excellent.
Thanks, Mick.
We'll see you next time.
Mother, man.